Dr. Clower. Our next presenter is new to Arlington County, though certainly not new to the region. Victor Hoskins has for 25 or more years been involved in economic development issues somewhere here in the metropolitan area, whether as deputy mayor in the District of Columbia for a number of years or as a member of the cabinet with economic development responsibilities in Maryland. He was lured into Arlington very recently, and I think, Victor, you've been in your job now, what, 6 weeks? Yeah, something like that. We're delighted to have him with us tonight because what we're talking about is right in his wheelhouse. And he will introduce, actually, our next speaker.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is Dr. Masoud Ahmadi. Dr. Masoud Ahmadi has about 30 years of experience in economic modeling. He's developed nationally award-winning economic models and strategic plans. And for almost 29 years, he's been really the senior economist advising not just the Department of Business and Economic Development for the state of Maryland, but also the Department of Housing and Community Development, Department of Transportation, and the Airport Authority. He's a distinguished senior economist, and he's lectured at American University and at the International American University in Belgium. And I'd like to bring up Dr. Masoud Ahmadi.
Thank you, Mr. Hoskins, for the kind remarks. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm also an outsider, though I'm from across the Potomac, so I'm not really too far from here. I live in Montgomery County. I have been tracking the regional economy for a number of years, as Victor mentioned, and particularly Maryland, and the district economy. And so this was really an interesting challenge for me to get my feet wet with the Arlington County economic performance in recent years. What I'd like to do is to start with the sort of a broad picture of the national economy, where it's headed, and that basically gives us a perspective on where the overall economy is headed, and then it would be a good segue into regional and local economic development issues. If you start with the next slide, please. As you know, you've heard it in the media. I don't really have to repeat it too much, but U.S. economy has been growing and is projected to grow at a healthy rate in the next few years, and more importantly, is poised to create jobs. We have had a number of years that the economy grew, but we were not creating jobs. So for the first time, we're seeing actually jobs are actually growing, so we will see some examples of that. The growth in real GDP in the United States is supported, obviously, by additional consumer spending, which is an important part of the U.S. economy. It's supported by more robust investment, and it's also supported by higher household formation, which we will explain to a little bit later. The GDP growth amounted to about 2.9%, 2.3% last year, and is slated to grow at 2.9% next year, and by about 3% in 2016. And the growth will moderate slightly due to anticipated contractionary policy of Fed, and the sort of growing the energy prices in the near future, and also the dollar is really strong, and the markets overseas are not doing as well as the United States economy. The combination of that will have an impact on U.S. net exports. So we will see a moderation of GDP growth in the near future through the 2020, though it will still be very healthy growth. Next slide, please. I just put together 3 charts that basically show you the reasons as to why the GDP is projected to grow. And one of them is the inflation-adjusted employee compensation, and that shows that basically the wages and salaries that employees receive obviously declined significantly during the recession that we had. It declined from a high of 5.6% annual growth in 2000 to a negative growth of 3.5%. So the payroll actually shrunk by 3.5% during the recession. Now it's growing. It started to grow, which is a good sign. is projected to grow by about 2.7% by the year 2015, and by 3.1%. I'm sorry, by 2.7% this year, and by about 3.1% next year. And then it would stabilize at around 2.4% for the balance of the forecast period. The higher employee compensation obviously supports additional consumer spending, and consumer spending, as you know, represents about two-thirds of the GDP in the United States. It's an important component of the economy. The next chart shows the growth in capital services. Now, capital services basically are the capital input to the production process, and they include basically structures, plant and equipment, inventories, intellectual property goods, and land. So an increase in capital services is equivalent to an increase in investment. Capital services grew at a really significantly higher than 6% in 2000, dropped to about 0.6% during the height of the recession. But as we see, it is growing. It is growing during the next several years during the forecast period, and it's projected to reach about 3.6% by 2017. And a higher consumer spending is really driving the additional investment in the economy. And finally, household formation, again, is an important factor in the economy. Household formation was pretty stagnant, actually, for several years. It was around 600,000 in 2014. Last year, it's projected to grow to about 900,000 next year, and to about 1.5 million, which is pretty healthy by year 2017. Higher household formation means there will be higher consumer spending, there will be higher demand for housing, and obviously there will be the resulting increase in residential investment. Next slide, please. And as I indicated, the recovery has not been jobless. We are creating jobs. This chart shows the unemployment rate in U.S., in Washington metro area, and in Arlington County. Unemployment rate in the U.S., as you all know, reached a sort of a high of 10%, significantly high in October of 2009, and then declined to a 6-year low of 5.6% last December, and is projected to grow further as the labor market keeps improving to 5.3% by 2017. Arlington County unemployment rate reached a high of 5.1% in January 2010. That's when we were just coming out of recession. And then declined to a 6-year low of 3%. In fact, unemployment in Arlington County is the lowest among all major areas in Washington metro areas, with the exception of Falls Church, where it dropped to about 2.7%. Next slide, please. Interest rates are projected to rise gradually due to anticipation of the tightening of the money supply by the Fed, and the improving anticipation of a growing economy. This chart shows interest rate on both short-term and long-term securities. The 3-month Treasury bill, as you can see, was at close to about zero between 2009 and 2014, and is slated to grow gradually to around 3.5% by 2018. The long-term rates, as shown by the 10-year Treasury bill, the yield of the 10-year Treasury note is going to rise. It reached a historic low of 1.8% actually in 2012. But again, as you can see in the red line, is projected to grow rapidly, reaching a high of 4.6% by the end of forecast period. And this next slide, please. This slide actually shows inflation rate. Again, inflation rate is going to be quite modest during the forecast period. It shows both overall inflation rate and the core inflation rate, which excludes the volatile food and energy components. As you can see, the overall inflation rate remained below the core rate between 2013 and 2015. However, by about 2016, they're going to converge to about 1.9% as energy prices are slated to start rising again, and they would stabilize at around 2%. So that is really a good sign that inflation would remain low during the existence of excess capacity in the economy. We still have a lot of slack in the economy and lower inflation expectations. Next slide, please. And this is an interesting chart, which actually gives you a little pause. We have been talking about the economy really doing well, and we are doing well, but there is a lot of slack still in the labor market. This is the U6 measure of the underutilized labor. It consists of three components. It includes the rate of people who are unemployed, the so-called unemployment rate, and it's called the U3, and the rate of people who are part-time for economic reasons. These are folks who really like to work full-time but can't find jobs, and they're working part-time. And it also includes the rate of people who are marginally attached to the workforce. And these are folks who are not in the labor market. They can't find jobs. They are out of the labor market, but they have looked for work in the past 12 months. So the U6 measure reached a high of 17.1%, and that is really high in the fourth quarter of 2009. But then it started to decline to about 11.4%, which is a good achievement. However, it is substantially above the pre-recession levels, which was around 9.1%. So that shows we still have a lot of slack in the labor market, which puts actually a sort of a ceiling on wages, means employers really are not required to offer higher wages in order to attract workers. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to the region, our previous speaker talked about that the regional economy is not really doing too well, and this is reflected in this slide that shows a growth regional product by major metropolitan area between 2012 and 2013. It shows the growth rate. As you can see, Washington Metro region was the only jurisdictions in the nation that experienced a contraction of its economy by 0.1%, while all other economies grew. Next slide, please. This slide shows the same, gives kind of a similar story, payroll job growth between 2013 and 2014. As you can see again, this was brought up again by the previous speaker, that Washington Metro region gained about 21,000 jobs during this period, and that really is the second lowest in the nation, just above Detroit, which gained about 20,000 jobs. Next slide, please. This slide sort of helps break down the job growth in Washington Metro region by industry during and after the recession. Now, it helps sort of put things in perspective. As you can see, the construction sector lost the highest number of jobs during the recession. We lost about 48,000 jobs. Now, the recession is measured from August 2008 to February 2010, while the recovery period is from February 10 to December of last year. The construction sector gained 22,000 jobs during the recovery. However, we are still in deficit. We still haven't recouped all the jobs we lost in the construction sector. The leisure and hospitality lost about 34,000 jobs during the recession, but gained twice as many jobs during the recovery, about 60,000. So that is actually the highest sort of number of jobs that we create in Arlington County in that sector. I mean, I'm sorry, in Washington MSA in that sector. Professional business services lost about 23,000 jobs, but gained 40,000 jobs during the recovery. Retail trade lost about the same number of jobs, 23,000, gained about 44,000 jobs. And finally, I'm just looking at the larger picture. Education and health services actually gained 19,000 jobs during the recession, and they also gained 50,000 jobs during the recovery. These four sectors represent about 78% of total employment growth in Washington Metro area. Looking at the federal government actually, employment in federal government agencies gained 19,000 jobs, and that's due to counter-cyclical spending of the federal government during the recession. However, during the recovery, we lost about 4,000 federal government jobs. Next slide. This chart breaks down employment growth in Washington Metro region by average income of the industries in which these jobs are located. As you can see, the highest job growth was located during the recovery is within the industries with the mid-range average income of around $41,000 to $60,000 a year. The lower paying jobs that paid less than $41,000 also saw a significant growth of 60,000, and the higher paying jobs lost 36,000 jobs, during a recession, while they gained 32,000 jobs during the recovery. So we still haven't recouped all the high-paying jobs that we lost during the recession in higher-paying sectors in the Washington MSA. Next slide, please. Now, this chart brings it home a little bit, shows the federal government and private sector job changes in Washington Metro region, and I show the Arlington, separate out Arlington County. As you can see from the top chart, the Arlington County lost 4,700 federal jobs during the, gained 3,100 jobs during the recession, but lost 4,700 jobs during the recovery. And that obviously is due to sequestration, due to a BRAC relocation, and the federal government shutdown that had negatively impacted Arlington County. If you look at Northern Virginia gained about 5,300 jobs during the recession, but lost 2,600 jobs during the recovery, federal jobs. Well, that means that if we took out Arlington County from Northern Virginia would have gained an additional 2,000 federal jobs during the recovery. So Arlington County actually is pulling down the Washington Metro region's federal employment. Looking at the chart below, the chart below shows the federal sector job growth in the region. Again, Arlington County, as it shows, lost about 3,500 jobs during the private sector jobs during the recession, but gained 3 times as many jobs during the recoveries. We gained about over 10,000 jobs during the recovery in Arlington. Next slide, please. Now, I have a series of 3 charts. This one shows the rate of growth of business formation in the region, and I'll distribute that between all establishments, federal establishments, and private establishments. Now, there's a couple of interesting statistics that pops out of this first slide. As you can see from the first one, business formation in Arlington County has remained pretty stagnant during the past 10 years, several years, actually, in the past 15 years. Between 2001 and 2007, pre-recession period, Arlington County establishments grew at a compound annual rate of 2.3%. During the recession, they grew by about 2.4%. And during the recovery, they grew about 2.5%. So it hasn't really changed much. Now, looking at at other sectors, the private sector, for instance, the private sector establishments, Arlington County business formation grew at an annual rate of 2.6% during the recovery period, which is the second behind Loudoun County. Fairfax County actually had only a 0.7% growth, so it really grew at a significantly slower pace. Finally, federal government establishments contracted at an annual rate of 2% in Arlington County during the recovery period, and that obviously is the largest contraction rate of all regions in the Washington Metro area. Next slide, please. This one shows the employment growth in the region. Again, shows it as a compound annual rate. As you can see, again, Arlington County is redded out. You can see the employment in Arlington County or all establishment grew at an annual rate of 1% during the recovery, and that is below performance of Prince William and Loudoun counties, but better than Fairfax County, which grew by about 0.7%. The private sector employment in Arlington County grew at a rate of 1.5% during the recovery. It's again, third lowest, lower than Prince William and Loudoun, but again, above Fairfax County. Finally, federal government employment declined at an annual rate of 1.1% in Arlington County, the highest contraction of employment in the region. Next slide, please. And finally, this chart shows the payroll growth in the region, again, in the combined annual rate version. As you can see, Arlington County payroll in Arlington County over establishments grew at the slowest pace in the region. It grew by 2.3% during the recovery, slower than all other counties in Northern Virginia and slower than the MSA growth of 2.7%. So we are not really adding a lot of payroll going back to the previous speaker, a lot of that is due to the growth of payroll in lower wage paying sectors. Private sector, just back up a little bit. The private sector payroll, however, grew at the annual rate of 3.5%, better than Fairfax County. And so the federal government establishment's payroll obviously contracted at 1%. So a lot of Arlington County's sort of this, problems with employment growth and with payroll growth and with the business formation really is due to the contraction of federal government and the reduction in government spending in the region, particularly the procurement spending. Next slide, please. Now, this slide shows the share of selected industry in Arlington County's total non-farm employment. In other words, it shows how important some of these industries are to the Arlington County economy. As you can see, professional and business services represents about 30% of all employment in the county. It's the largest employer, followed by the federal government, which is still the second largest employer of 17%. So the two sectors combined represent about 47% of all employment in Arlington County. And that tells you something, that the Arlington County economy is really dominated by these two sectors, and therefore it's highly vulnerable to whatever happens, either to federal government slowdown or to professional services slowdown because of the shrinkage in federal dollar spending. Next slide, please. This one shows job growth in Arlington County by selected industries during and after the recession. Again, as you can see, the leisure and hospitality industry lost 1,700 jobs, but gained twice as many jobs during the recovery. Similar, the professional business services actually gained some jobs during the recession, again, thanks to federal government procurement spending during the recession, and gained the highest number of jobs of about 4,800 during the recovery. Professional business services growth in employment in Arlington accounts for about 45% of job growth. Leisure hospitality growth represents about 33%. The two sectors combined account for about 78% of job growth in Arlington County. Again, that shows you the prominence of these two sectors in the Arlington County economy. Next slide, please. This chart shows how job growth occurs by income group in Arlington. Most jobs actually in Arlington County occurred in industries that pay higher income, in the higher range incomes of over $62,000. Those industries lost 548 jobs during the recession, but gained 5,500 jobs during the recovery. So that's where most of the job growth occurred, in higher paying establishments. Lower paying establishments also gained a considerable number of jobs. They gained about 3,400 jobs during the recovery. Next slide, please. Now, here is, I did a shift share, which is a standard economic analysis of trying to identify lagging and growing industries in Arlington County. Now, what happens is I divided the employment growth into three components in Arlington by industry. The first component is the U.S. growth effect. The second component is the U.S. industrial mix effect. And the final component is the Arlington County's own competitive effect. And I explained that a little bit later. But just to summarize, the U.S. growth effect essentially explains how much of a job growth in Arlington County is due to health of the national economy, the national economic trends. If the national economy is growing, we would expect to see a rise in employment in Arlington. The U.S. growth effect, which results from the overall growth of the U.S. economy, we project that it should generate about 5,300 jobs in professional business services. In other words, had Arlington Industries grown at the overall national growth rate, they would have expected to see a growth of about 5,300 jobs in Arlington. The U.S. industrial mix effect shows how much of a job growth in Arlington is due to the growth of specific industries at the national level, not at the local level. Therefore, if professional business services in Arlington, if those industries had grown at the same rate as the industry grows in the nation, they would have gained an additional 2,600 jobs. Okay? But if you look at the Arlington competitive effect, we see a loss of about 3,000 jobs, and that's due to Arlington County's, again, comparative disadvantages, and that results from the county's heavy reliance on federal government spending and federal government, overall federal government sort of presence in the region. The total employment change in that sector is the sum of the three components. As you can see, most industries in Arlington are not as competitive as they are in the nation as a whole. because they show a negative competitive advantage effect. Two industries show positive results. The information technology and financial activities, which includes finance, insurance, and real estate sectors, they are highly competitive. They show a positive competitive effects. And one of them, a financial activity sector, actually has a location quotient of 0.7, which means although Arlington County possesses a strong competitive advantage in that sector, we have 30% less concentration of that industry in Arlington, which means there's a significant room for growth of this potentially competitive industry in the county. Next slide, please. The next slide, I just summed up the two national effects to compare it with the competitive effect and the overall, the actual job growth. As you can see, the expected change, which shows the national growth effects and the industrial mix effect, is quite larger than what actually happened in the Arlington economy. And as you can see, the red bars, which show the competitive effect, is pulling down the overall employment rate, overall employment growth in the region. Next slide, please. Here I compare the rate of growth of major economic sectors in Arlington, both lagging and competitive, with the similar growth rate in Washington MSA and the US. As you can see from this chart, the lagging industries in Arlington are growing at a significantly slower pace than the national growth rate. On the other hand, competitive sectors in Arlington are growing at a significantly higher pace than the overall national growth rate. Next slide, please. Now, moving on quickly to the construction sector and residential sector, I'm using the residential building permits as a proxy for construction activity, residential construction activity. As you can see from the red bar, Arlington County's residential construction activity, as shown by permits, declined by a compound annual rate of 46%. During the recession, which is the highest contraction in the region. In Washington MSA declined by 26%. Nationally, we had a decline of about 35%. However, construction gained steam during the recovery in Arlington, and as shown by the growth of the residential building permits, which they grew by about 28% in Arlington, which is about twice as fast as the growth of the construction activity in the Washington MSA. Next slide, please. Now, despite this growth in residential construction activity, we still have a significant shortage of affordable and available rental housing units to families earning less than 50% of the median income in the county. Now, the county's median income is $101,000, so you're looking at folks that are earning less than $50,000 a year. For those families, let's say at 50% of the AMI, we have a shortage of 62 affordable and available rental housing units per 100 rental households. That translates into a shortage of about 8,800 units in the county. Next slide, please. Now, just to bring things to perspective, we talked about unemployment rate that has declined in Arlington County. Reached a 6-year low of 3% in the region, the lowest rate. We talked about Arlington County being too sensitive to fluctuations in two economic sectors because they represent about 47% of all employment, and so it's really the economy is not diversified. We talked about how the BRAC sequestration and federal government shutdown impacted the region, particularly Arlington County. Arlington County lost about 4,700 jobs. Due to these effects. And we saw that Arlington County private sector economic growth is comparable to the growth in the Washington MSA and the US, but is below the comparable growth in the district. So district is growing faster than Arlington. Next slide. Here I want to spend a little bit of time on the first bullet. As I said, compared to the United States, most economic sectors in Arlington are less competitive and they're growing at a slower pace. Now, if Arlington Industries had followed the national trends, right, we would have gained an additional 15,000 jobs since the recovery began in 2010. Instead, Arlington County gained 9,000 jobs. So the 6,000 fewer jobs in Arlington County is due to the county's competitive disadvantages, which results from obviously heavy reliance on a shrinking federal government and a rigid, non-diversified structure of its economy. Now, we can remedy this by obviously providing business incentives and by shifting the resources or the economics focus away from federal government to private sector. And by making Arlington County more competitive, we can capture the jobs that we were losing due to the competitive, non-competitive nature of the industries. Let's say if the Arlington County industries were as competitive as the nation when the recovery began in 2010, we would have gained 6,000 jobs, and that's equivalent to reducing business vacancy rate in Arlington by about 3 percentage points. My sort of back-of-an-envelope analysis shows that basically every 1 percentage point reduction in rental vacancy rate, business vacancy rate, I'm sorry, is equivalent to generating about 2,200 jobs. And that's direct full-time equivalent jobs. And if you bring in the multipliers, you're looking at about 3,300 jobs. So it really is critical for Arlington County to become competitive and regain a competitive footing in order not to lose jobs as the economy keeps growing. Now, the Arlington County's growth in the near future really depends on, would have to be accompanied by comparable growth in labor force, right? You can't create jobs if you don't have folks to fill those jobs. Now, traditionally, there are 4 areas where you can get labor supply. Traditionally, labor supply has been coming from the increased population and labor force. Now, I was looking at the most recent report by Virginia's Employment Commission, and it indicated that labor force is, the population is going to be pretty stagnant during the next 5 years. In fact, it is projected by Virginia's Employment Commission, the population in Arlington is going to decline by about 0.4% between 2010 and 2020. More importantly, the population of the millennial cohort. Now, this is very critical. The millennial cohort are people in the age group of 25 to 34. These are highly mobile population, highly educated, and they represent the core of the employment base for high-tech industries. The millennial population, actually, Arlington County has a competitive advantage over millennial population. We have the highest concentration of millennial population in Arlington, and which is really an asset. But we are losing that population at the rate of 14.5% between 2010 and 2014. So in fact, that core population we are losing them at a significantly faster pace than the overall reduction in population. Okay, so the future growth in Arlington County cannot be accommodated by future growth in population and labor force. I estimated that the labor force during the next 5 years we're probably going to decline by about 0.3%. So where are we going to get folks to fill those jobs if we create those jobs? The second option will be obviously to resort to what Arlington County has been doing to encourage the growth of in-commute. These are folks that reside in other jurisdictions in Northern Virginia, Maryland, or the district, and commute to Virginia and to Arlington. And these commuters represent about 86% of all jobs in Arlington. Arlington residents represent only 14% of all jobs in Arlington. Okay? Therefore, every year we export a significant component of tax base from real estate, potential real estate taxes, and potential consumer spending, sales taxes, to locations outside Arlington. Okay? Therefore, we need to, so that really is not really a good option by encouraging the in-commute of workers. The third option is to look at the pools of unemployed labor in Arlington. With 3% unemployment rate, we have about 4,000 unemployed people in Arlington County. Okay? Potentially, unemployment rate in Arlington County can decline to as low as about 1.7%, the rate we experienced back in November of 2010. That has been the lowest rate I have seen in Arlington for almost 15 years. Okay? Now, if we do that, we can essentially generate a pool of about 2,600 workers available for workforce. The problem is their skills are deteriorated, and because they've been on the unemployment rolls for a while. So you need to provide training, retool these people in order to make their skills more adaptable to the needs of the sort of skill-intensive industries in Arlington. Therefore, education and training becomes an important prerequisite for future economic growth in Arlington. The final option, obviously, which is really the one that makes quite a bit of sense, is to encourage the in-migration of our workers, particularly the millennials, folks, again, in the 25 to 34 age group that are a highly skilled workforce and highly mobile. Now, this particular cohort doesn't like to buy homes. They're very mobile. They don't like to be tied on to a mortgage, and they prefer rental housing. I mean, I've seen it in Maryland. I've seen it in Arlington. I mean, it's all over. It's the same trend. In fact, the millennials represent about 6% of homeowners in Arlington, while they account for 46% of all rental housing in Arlington. Okay, that means that we definitely have to increase the availability of affordable rental housing for this specific cohort if Arlington County is going to attract these folks from other regions in order to fill the jobs that we hopefully plan to create by our business incentives and other methods. Thank you, and I'll stop and later on take questions.